Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Hello, and thank you for downloading this episode of The Mind Matters. I'm Chris Stafford.
And I'm Jenny Susser.
And this is already episode 2, Jenny.
I know, my how time flies, Chris.
It does when you're having fun. This week we have another important topic which so many athletes are impacted by, whether they're professional or amateur, because the commercial pressures of sponsors, media interest, and so on, puts a lot on the mind of athletes when they're getting ready for performance, and that is, of course, the impact of social media, or media generally. This is a subject, I think, that affects all sports today, and women.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk about this today because I see this all the time, not only in the media, in the news, but in my practice, for sure. It is something that, as a sports psychologist, over the last decade, it has become one of our major issues that we have to help our athletes with. It takes a tremendous toll on energy and focus for an athlete. So I'm glad that we're talking about it.
And you often see, particularly Instagram, where athletes are obligated to do a story for their sponsors daily, and even during competition weeks, which puts a lot of pressure on them and expectation. Now, not everybody is cut out for that, are they? There's some that, just take it in their stride. And I can think of even some of our WISP ambassadors who, like Naya Tapper, the US rugby player, she's extremely comfortable doing it and she does it constantly. But that's not for everybody, is it?
No, it's not. It certainly is not. It's really interesting that certain people are wired for that. I think, obviously we have a generational effect with regards to, the ability and facility and draw towards social media. Like, for instance, my niece and her husband, they're in their mid-30s now, so millennial, and they made their careers on social media. So everywhere we go, whenever I'm visiting, everywhere we go, they pull out the phone and boom, do a selfie, or they'll take a video and they'll post it right away. And, by the time we get back to the house or done or after dinner, they have 750 likes. And, it's really, it's a total comfort level for them. And they try desperately to coach me because it is not a comfort level for me. But it is very interesting how some people are really, really drawn to that, which will give them an edge in terms of their social status and their branding. However, I wonder with athletes, actually, I don't wonder. I can say I wonder what it costs them in terms of their energy once they get to perform. But I know it has a great cost, and the research actually supports that.
And there's also peer pressure. The expectation from, amongst your friends, even if you're not a professional athlete, you may be an amateur athlete, you may be a budding professional athlete who wants to make their mark and establish their following. But I think, to most people, it seems to me that they are so motivated, like your niece, by the number of likes or shares they've got. I mean, the number of likes and followers. What does that tell us about our psyche?
Well, I wish it told us more about our psyche, but really what it tells us even the most about is our chemical makeup and how easy it is to become chemically dependent. I know that sounds very weird to say, hey, you know what? We're addicted to social media. We're addicted to likes and getting likes, and which is why it just has the power that it has. We have a chemical in our bodies and brains called dopamine. And dopamine is very connected to addiction, and it's both a feel good and a feel bad chemical. So we get addicted to both the feeling good and the feeling bad about it. There's a lot of bad stuff to see on social media these days, and I even catch myself scrolling through going, yeah, 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 and it increasing my anger with each thing that I scroll and how I've designed my feed. And so, but the dopamine is what elicits this reaction and makes me feel this way. And because it has an addictive effect, it's the thing that's going to send me to my phone for an average of 2,600 touches per day. So it's less about our psyche and our psychology, and it's a lot more about our chemical and our physiology. And I think until we really begin to address that, we don't have the kind of power over it that we need to in order to impact, for instance, athletic performance.
Well, we could say that we have control over that. We do have control to turn the darn phone off or, to ignore it. But it is like a magnet. And you touched on it there, the downside to it, the negative impact of those unwanted comments, the trolling, and this is all through social media that we've experienced in recent years, which, again, as well as it gives you a high when you have so many likes to what you've just posted, if you have some negative comments or some trolling, it's very hurtful. It is.
And it's interesting how easy it is for people to be mean on social media. It's very disappointing to me as a psychologist. And it's also a line that we culturally crossed, a bunch of years ago, and we sort of haven't come back to that. It's very acceptable now for trolling and to be mean and to say nasty things. And, most people's Twitter handles are anonymous, so you have no idea who's calling you the kind of names that they're calling you, or where they come from, or what they look like. A lot of the female athletes really experience quite a lot of fat shaming and physical comments. They'll get commented, they'll blasted, trolled for how their appearance, how they look. And it's not just athletes, it's everyone. I actually was listening to the comedian Margaret Cho the other day, and this is like years, tape from years and years and years ago. And she's like, yeah, they call me Thunder Thighs on the internet. And it's like, it's just so amazing. And they go after people like that. I just find it really, from a social perspective, it's very sad to me. With the athletes that I work with, it creates an incredible challenge for me to keep them away from their phones.
Well, it is a huge distraction, of course, too, to your actual mental game for your performance. Now, whatever that may be, in sport and in life, how do you train the mind to discipline yourself to not be pulled in and let the dopamine take over?
That's an awesome question. So you have to create a training program sort of like you would for any other sort of skill you are trying to develop. The biggest piece is awareness. And it's our addiction and our habit with our smartphones is very mindless at this point. You can go anywhere. I'm a big observer of human behavior, and anywhere you go, if anyone has a moment, the first thing they do is reach for their phone. You don't ever,
Guilty.
Yeah, likewise. I'm guilty too. And it's something that I even work on. But anywhere you go, you see someone who, is standing in a line somewhere, to order food or anything. Boom, they pull out their phone. Nobody sits in silence. Nobody just hangs out anymore. Nobody stands in line alone. I mean, the great thing about smartphones is that you don't ever feel like you're alone. There's a big piece where you don't have to really confront that awkwardness of not having something to do or say or someone to be with. So there is a piece of that. But it's such a habit that you have to really bring that up to a level of awareness. So that's one of the first things I do with my athletes is there are some apps where you can track your phone usage, like how much you're on each individual app, and how many times you touch your screen a day and how many times you pick your phone up. And so that's the first place that I'll have the athletes start with is, okay, how much are you on your phone, and how much is it costing you energetically? And a lot of them are really surprised. Some athletes will be like, oh, I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time to visualize, or, I find myself running out of time to do some of the mental training exercises that we talk about. So I have them do those apps, a tracker, and see how much time they spend on their phone. I've made a joke for years and years and years in my clinics and lectures. And I've said, you want to create this new habit. It'll take you 10 minutes a day for 30 days, and you'll get a pretty good jump start on it. And people are like moaning and groaning about 10 minutes. And I always say, hey, I'm happy to follow you around for a day. I bet you I can find lots of 10-minute spells in your day where you could be doing something other than scrolling on your phone. So that's the first thing, is bringing it up to a level of awareness. A lot of people are shocked at how much they actually use their phones.
Well, you touched on there about, whenever we're alone, we might be in a line waiting for something, or whatever we're doing in life. If we just have that moment when we're not engaged in some way, we grab the phone. Now, it does give us a sense of having company and something to distract us, and that we are not alone. So let's drill a little bit deeper here, Jenny, because what are we afraid of then? If we didn't have our phone with us, as we used not to, okay, generations now automatically have their phone. They've not known what it's like to be without. So let's imagine we take our phones away. What are we afraid of? That aloneness, and is there pressure on us then to socialize with strangers if we're in line for food or the bank or whatever it may be? What is it we're afraid of?
That's a great question. I think it's different for everybody. However, what I see the most is that when your hands are idle, then your mind tends to not be idle. So it depends on what's going on for you. You could be having a tough day. You could be having a great day. You could be very comfortable in social situations. You could be very uncomfortable in social situations. So I think we use the phone to distract our minds from actually having to pay attention to or be with some of the negative or difficult emotions that we might experience if we were forced to actually experience them. So, you see people all the time jumping on their phone. It's interesting with our younger generations, because like our generation, I'm in my mid-50s, our generation, we've sort of learned to jump to the phone, but I still am quite fascinated by people watching, so I travel quite a bit, and a lot of times I'll just sit in the airport and people watch, and you look around, and the younger generations are not doing that at all because they're so enticed by their phone. But sometimes when you're just sitting idly, then those thoughts that you've been trying not to think about will come up, and then you'll have to think about them, or you'll have to deal with whatever emotion that is. And I think the phone or your smartphone, your device, creates a very good distraction for that. And by good, I'm not necessarily saying it's a good idea to always distract yourself for that. There's a time and a place for that. But I think it's keeping a lot of people from actually ever confronting some of the things that they think or feel.
And also, it avoids socialization in the only way we ever used to know how.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think it's really going to be interesting over the next couple of decades how our culture and our society grows and evolves, and where we end up with regards to community and social events and how people relate to each other. I'm wondering in 20 years, what's the divorce rate going to be like? Because if we don't have any idea of how to really connect and really relate to each other, then we're going to continue to fail at that. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. We need to learn how to be in communication beyond, LOL, OMG, all the different ways that we don't really communicate. or now it's just, emoticons, just boom, here, a smiley face, a thumbs up. And I'm guilty of that too. So I think we have to work a little bit harder, or maybe figure out how to work a little bit harder to actually insert some real communication into our days.
And of course, smartphones, social media, they all offer expediency in a very fast lifestyle.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes was from the late, wonderful Carrie Fisher. And shortly before she died, she was quoted as saying something to the effect of, these days, even instant gratification takes too long. Yeah. So brilliant and so true and so difficult. And with young athletes, it's definitely something that us sports psychologists are really wrestling with. So I was working with a professional athlete, a young woman, a highly paid professional athlete, great athlete. And when I would go to practices during breaks, I think she would pick up her phone before she would pick up her water bottle. And I remember at the time, I couldn't find it again, but I remember reading a data point that it takes 90 seconds to recover from a digital interruption. And by digital interruption, they meant like you're sitting having a conversation and your phone is even upside down and it beeps and you don't even answer it. But to return to the focus of the conversation takes you 90 seconds because you're thinking, who was that? What did they want? Did I leave the oven on? Did something bad happen? Like the just the cascade of thoughts that you can have when your phone buzzes once and you don't know what it's from. It can take up to 90 seconds to recover from that. Harvard released a study with a data point saying it takes 23 minutes to recover from a distraction at work. 23 minutes. Can you imagine, like, how does anyone ever get anything done? 23 minutes to recover. So when we're working with athletes and they are so tethered to their phones and their devices, it is a constant battle to get them to see it a different way. And so once they've got the awareness of that they're spending this much time on their device, then I like to try and bring it back to, okay, so I'm not trying to take your device away from you, but what do you really want out of your sport? People don't call a sports psychologist because they're perfect and there's no issue, right? Most people, by the time I receive a phone call, they're wrestling with something. They're failing at something. They're missing a skill. They need help. They want to perform better. And there's something that they need in order to be able to perform better. And there's always, it always comes down to focus and energy. Now, there are 100 million things that impact an athlete's focus and their energy and their ability to focus. But focus is a huge element. It is probably one of the top 3 elements with regards to performance. And so once they realize that their focus is diluted by their smartphone or social media time usage, then we've got to get them to connect to the energetic cost, because the dopamine comes around and you become so dopamine dependent because of the emotional component. So if all we were doing was going on social media and reading phone numbers or something incredibly boring that had zero emotional content, there wouldn't be that draw. It wouldn't pull us in like dopamine does. So it's the emotional part. But emotions, if they're negative, can have huge cost, especially to an athlete's performance.
Well, and this is at a critical time, obviously, before competition, but even before training. There should be a discipline, right? I mean, it's easy for us to sit here and say there should be a discipline. You should leave the phone at home or leave it in the car when you're going training. Mm-hmm. Or at some point, discipline yourself to turn off to it. Because even for training, I think importantly, right? That's as important as competition,
Well, yeah, if you are not focused, if you're distracted, not focused, and emotionally upset during training, you're missing some element of your training. I mean, that's just 100%. And so, yeah, I completely agree with that. And a lot of the coaches I talk to try to do that. It's really, really tough right now. Last year during the Winter Olympics, I remember reading something about Michaela Schifrin and how her mom is one of her main coaches. And she gives her mom her phone, her computer, all of her devices 2 weeks before the Olympics start. Right? That's her commitment. I'm not going to watch anything. I'm not going to see anything. She said this in an interview, and I was so impressed by that. But that's the type of commitment that it takes, right? And she won a gold medal. And not everybody's willing to do that. So you got to sort of, that is the gold standard, quite literally. Here, take my phone for 2 weeks and don't let me be influenced by it, and be as protected as you can. Now, I think Michaela Schifrin made a big mistake and an error between her 2 runs on her slalom. She had won the giant slalom, which she wasn't expected to do. And then she's fairly well known for running behind the starting tent and vomiting from nerves, right? So that's she's known for doing that. Not a big deal. But she did that before her first run for the slalom, right? A couple days after she'd won the giant slalom, which she wasn't expected to win. And the slalom was her big deal because she would have been the first alpine skier ever to back-to-back on that. So she was obviously feeling tremendous amounts of pressure, went behind the tent, vomited, had a very mediocre 4th place first run. And then I think she made a big mistake in that she went and granted them a TV interview. And the very first thing the reporter asked her is, are you nervous? Well, that's not a question that an athlete should be answering, 20 minutes before they're about to go and try and win a gold medal at the Olympics, So it's really difficult. Now, she was wearing her helmet and those gold reflective goggles, so she clearly was trying to protect herself as much as she could. She was very quick in the interview. I think she was probably under the type of pressure that you were talking about at the very beginning of our episode, that their sponsors, they require this type of activity of them. Now, did it cost her the gold medal? I think it had a hand in it. And so it's very difficult. So these athletes have to figure out, okay, how do I balance my performance with my sponsors and with my, obligations, even contractual obligations to these sponsors, to these companies and corporations, so that I can continue to fund my sport. So it's a really difficult fine line that they, or a sharp edge, whatever you want to call it, that they have to walk in order to be able to perform well. The irony is you go to too many, sponsor events and your performance falls, and then all of a sudden you don't have a sponsor.
Well, also the media pressure too. There's the press officer always standing behind you, bringing you to the next interview. And there's that kind of pressure too, that the governing body of the sport and the media itself, the expectations that and with the higher the elite athlete, the more successful they are, the more pressure there is on them, of course. And how they handled that really is down to their team and guiding them too. And I think the other element of that, of course, is they want to read their reviews in a way. I mean, it's like any actress who goes on stage or any performance. Do they read their reviews? Some absolutely do not. They avoid it, right? Because they don't want to read the negative reviews.
Yeah, but I would say that that's really the exception rather than the rule. I think that people are jumping on social media. I mean, the young professional athlete that I told you about, took a lot of flack on social media, and it impacted her greatly. And how can it not? The old saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me." That's like one of the oldest wives' tales. I don't know if you grew up hearing it, but I grew up hearing it all the time, and it wouldn't just be the teachers or your parents saying that, and I remember kids saying it to each other when they were mean. Some kid would say something mean to some other kid and they would put back with that. However, I don't think it bears the least resemblance of the truth. I think that we're such social animals and we are so interested in what other people think of us that when someone says something really negative, it can be really, really painful, especially if it's something where you've made yourself vulnerable. And believe it or not, the vulnerability of being a professional athlete is pretty significant. You know, you're out there for everyone to judge and observe, and you make a mistake, you know, on the world stage. I mean, that's pretty big. Those are hard events to recover from. And then you have, you know, somebody sitting on their couch with their feet up, you know, and belly spilling over their pants saying, hey, you suck and you're fat. I mean, it's really, it's a huge, huge challenge.
It is pressure, obviously, that is very hard for any one of us to take, really, because wherever we put ourselves out there, whether it's be yourself as a psychologist, myself as a broadcaster, a journalist, you put yourself out there, you put yourself in that public space, and everybody seems to have an opinion these days. And just going back to that discipline of putting your phone away, and whenever you can, and certainly in terms of performance and training, it is very, very important in your preparation. But why we don't put our phones down now, why we are so drawn to them, is there something there that tells you that there is insecurity going on, or the avoidance of socialization on a one-to-one? I'm wondering again if any of that resonates, Jenny.
You know, I think that it does, but I don't know that it's necessarily social media's fault. You know, I think back to when I was an athlete, a competitive athlete in the 80s. And my swimming career, I swam at UCLA and from 85 to 89. And I think back to, okay, what were the things that distracted us back then? You know, we didn't have the type of media. We had, at UCLA, we had the Daily Bruin. So if by some, you know, stroke of luck, the women's swim team made it into the Daily Bruin, you know, that was that. But there was more, back then it was more like gossip. And the gossip would go through the team or the athletic department or different teams or your dorm. And that's what it was. But it had the same effect. You know, it's the same thing where you would run to a pack of girls and go, did you hear about blah, blah, blah? I think that produces the same dopaminergic response as scrolling through Twitter does, quite honestly. So I think that I think it's a little bit of human nature. Obviously, we're wired for that because we succumb to it so quickly. And it's really, you know, you really have to get clear about how you're going to confront it and how you're going to manage it. So with athletes these days, it's about that they have to experience some sort of benefit from their social media diet before they truly commit to it. So I try to get an athlete to commit to, you know, a 30-day diet. Okay, I pick a month. Okay, here's a good month. Let's just say, okay, here's what we're going to do. And we create what the system's going to be. The parents, if it's appropriate, are on board, the coach, the trainer, you know, whoever is involved, whatever the team is that's involved. We all commit to the same thing and try to support the athlete with this, remind the athlete. You know, the irony is that I'll have them set reminders on their phone to put their phone down. I always love that. And then but it takes a little bit of time. It's not something that you see the first day. So I have found that it takes about a month. And then the athlete, after about a month, they can look back and go, oh, yeah, I have been a little sharper. I have been a little more energized. I have felt a little more positive. I have been able to practice a little bit better. I did get a hold of that skill that I was having a little bit of trouble with. And then they see that it's worth it, right? So again, a reward has been created from decreasing the dopamine reward system. And once they can connect to that, then it makes it a little bit easier for them to follow that through.
Has social media heightened our appetite to be liked, or do we always want to be liked? So this is a way of, you know, that public affirmation, isn't it? And popularity. And I mentioned peer pressure earlier, but it also just from within, isn't it? And it gives you that instant gratification, even if it is slow to come.
Right. Well, I think that it's always there for us. We've always really, I mean, if you think about even sport, athletes have always loved the roar of the crowd, no matter, before social media or after. The interesting thing about social media is that anybody can become an influencer and have the roar of the crowd via likes. So I think that, again, it's a human wiring that we're social. We're meant to be social. We're driven by our social needs. And I think that social media has really, really taken advantage of that. Not maybe knowingly, maybe not, but for sure taken advantage of something that was just sitting there already, quite human and easy to be manipulated.
And you mentioned there that being an influencer, how we are driven now by those social media experts who say being an influencer is as important as having followers or likes.
Yeah.
And that's a component that we didn't really have socially. I mean, we might be influential in our own kitchen, but, for most people...
Sure.
It really wouldn't go beyond that unless you were into performance in some way and in life and that you were being judged. So that influence element is fairly new to us, isn't it?
I think that it is on scale, which is exactly what you're talking about. If you look on Instagram or on social media, some of the people who have some of the most following are some of the greatest mysteries to me in the world. You're an influencer, but I'm sorry, why? It doesn't, to me, it doesn't make any sense, but I'm not of that generation. And, when you and I were growing up, there was nobody in high school that had, 1 million people giving, likes and constantly waiting for you to post your next selfie. I remember reading something about Kim Kardashian when she started. Her goal was to do 1,500 selfies a day. And it's just stunning to me. But again, it's not my generation, so I'm not, embedded in that culture. However, they're trying to figure out a balance, I think, is where we're at, and the difficulty. And I think that what the social media, the influencer, the likes, the popularity contest that it has become is taking us away from trying to figure out how to really connect with and develop the self. And I'm starting to see a bit of that swing back to the other end of the spectrum as we're starting to feel a little bit lost and corporate culture is moving towards mindfulness meditation. So, there's always a correction. Always, always, always. The pendulum swings to one end of the spectrum and, just by nature, it's going to be drawn back to the other end of the spectrum at some point. So I think, these are all things for us to continue to learn how to be better, how to use our minds better, and what can we do? So for an athlete, to me, you've got to pay as much attention to your mental and emotional fitness as you do to your physical fitness. Now, training the mind doesn't necessarily take as much time as it does to train the body. And I have found that with athletes, they can make incredible progress, in 2 or 3 10 to 15 minute sessions per day. Meanwhile, training can take 2 or 3, 2-hour sessions per day. But again, it's for an athlete, it's a matter of hunger. How hungry are you? How great do you want to be? And not everybody, even though everybody says they want to be the best, not everybody does. Not everybody's willing to do what it takes to be the best, which is completely fine. And so as sports psychologists, we make that available. And then they get to step into and work as hard as they're hungry.
Well, we haven't talked about the demands of the fans out there too. We've talked about the commercial pressures through sponsors and the media pressures, but the fan pressure as well is another element. And also the relevance of athletes is another topic we're going to cover, Jenny, in a future episode, I think, because that happens as well. That's a component of this conversation in a way, but we also want to discuss it for athletes and for those of people that have come out of the limelight in, when they've retired. And I think that's another interesting component too of sports psychology and preparing people for that too. So shall we carry that on to another episode?
Yeah, I think that's a great teaser to talk about identity and what happens to an athlete identity from retirement or a career-ending injury. It can be, it's a huge, huge challenge. Every athlete confronts it at some point, and it is definitely a psychological challenge.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts or advice for people to take away from this episode, Jenny?
Well, okay, so we talked about bringing your usage of social media and how many times you're on your phone up to a level of awareness. That's a huge thing, and it's trackable, so you can make a big difference with that. Committing to something and seeing it through for a month, then going back and evaluating and seeing, okay, how is my energy? How is my focus? How is my learning? How is my skill development? Because that's going to give them some evidence that says, hey, you know what? Staying off your device is helping you, is supporting you, is making things better. Creating that habit, you have to enlist your team, your entire team. Everybody's got to know about it. And this is where, athletes don't typically like to do that because then they've got someone holding their feet to the fire. But really, it's going to be the environment you're around. When I worked with that professional athlete, everybody put their phone down. When we decided to tackle that, everybody put their phone down. We had a bag, and as we walked to the practice facility, everybody put their phone on airplane and put it in the bag, and nobody had their phone. So the entire team was supporting this social media diet, and it was really effective from that standpoint. So it takes a village. It's going to take more than one person to just sort of change their media habits. And if they've got some good support and got a reason to do it, then all those things make it much easier, and the addiction can really be altered in about a month.
It will free up your time, and it might make you even happier without those kind of pressures. Jenny, I thought this was a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm glad that we had the chance to talk about it.
And if anyone wants to read your blog or follow you on social media, let them know how to do that.
drjenny.com, so drjenny.com, and you can find links to all of my social media, Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn on my website.
And of course, we're at Wisp Sports. You can join in the conversation on social media, or you can drop us a line here if you have any questions for Jenny. That can go to info@wispsports.com. That's an easy email. Or if you have any suggestions or questions for future topics that you would like Jenny to cover, drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear what you think of the show and if it's helpful to you. And if you want to take up that challenge too, of dropping your phone, putting it on one side, to see how long you can do that for. Jenny, we'll be back in a couple of weeks and more interesting conversations. I'm looking forward to that.
Me too. Thanks, Chris.